Welcome to the NanoCruising podcast, where we talk about dinghy cruising and trailer sailing. Today we talk with the prolific Michael Storr to learn about his story, how he got into sailing, some of his philosophies behind sailing, talk about his background, how he became a designer, we talk about the advantages of sailing canoes, and a lot more. Thank you, Michael, for joining us today on NanoCruising. I've been following you many years, your designs and so on. You've been a pillar in the small boat, affordable small boat plans, and really kind of would like you to start probably to let us know what inspired you to start affordable plans for this community. Really is really what I think that's what you're going after. That's what it looks like, and you have the sales, of course. We'll go into that, but let me know how you got into that. It'd be fun for everybody to know.
So when I was young, I discovered sailing by accident. My family has no background in sailing at all.
Right.
So we ended up renting a house between the house we were renting before and the building of our family home. So there were about 3 to 5 months where we rented a house on the waterfront of Pittwater.
Okay.
Which is a waterway about 45 minutes north of Sydney, in Australia. So I walked out one Sunday spring or beginning of summer, and it was a really hot day, and there were all these sailboats rigging. There was a right-of-way street that went down the side of our house to the beach, and on one side was a monohull club, a dinghy club, and on the other side there was a multi-hull club. And there were typically about 60 boats rigging up. Our quiet little beach in front of our house has just filled up with all these strange things.
Right.
And being a geeky 12-year-old, I was wandering around, having a look at it all.
Right.
And a voice called out and said, "Hey, Michael, what are you doing here?" And it was the bus driver from our local area where we'd been living before. And his name was Goose, and he was trying to get a junior group going for the catamarans. He was also head of the Sea Scouts, the Scoutmaster for the Sea Scouts.
Okay.
And also a boat builder for fiberglass boats.
Wow.
And he and his crew, Tim, took me out for a sail on their 18-foot catamaran. And I don't remember much except for...
You got the bite,
yeah, I just looking up and seeing that we'd actually sailed the length of Pittwater, and we were out in Broken Bay and I could see the ocean.
Right.
And the boat was sailing up the swells and down, and there was just this sense of the world was out there. You know, the whole ocean was out there.
Right.
And that has sort of stuck with me in a way.
That's a wonderful introduction to sailing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really important image. Like, we pick up different images of what we've done, and some particular things stick with us. And that's one of the really important things to me. That sense of leaving somewhere and then ending up somewhere else, even if it's within the same waterway. So that's what really started me. So I joined the Scouts. Our landlord in that rental house had a boat for sale that had belonged to his son, so we bought it for $70. And I spent 2 seasons being very nervous, just sailing backwards and forwards along the beach, and watching the boats from the sailing club go in and out. And eventually I started racing with about 5 other junior boats.
Nice. The best way to learn is racing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everything fits together. Like, that's what I really like about sailing. That whichever parts of sailing you experience creates depth in all the other parts of sailing that you know and experience or want to do. And that's why it's so possible to stick to it for 52 years.
Amazing. This is great.
Yeah.
So you learn to sail, you get a great introduction. And did you start to build your own before you got into designing them? Is that how did that journey work?
Not really. Like, my initial interest was that in the 1970s, there was such a hotbed of different thoughts about yacht design.
Right.
I've started off being interested in dinghy design and yacht design, but the very busy area was yacht design. And that was just moving so fast from big, fat, heavy displacement, deep keeled boats to much lighter boats, being driven by a lot of designs from New Zealand, by Bruce Farr and Paul Whiting and Laurie Davidson and a few others.
Right.
And it was really the beginning of the dinghy-style yacht. And there was a lot of talk at that time about how these dinghy-style yachts, you could put much smaller sails on them. The boats were lighter, so there was less building cost. And a lot of the things that had appealed to me about dinghies sort of seemed to be happening inside yachts. So I always imagined myself being a yacht designer.
Okay.
But I didn't know how to get into that. Australia being such a backwater in many ways, with only not even a handful of yacht designers. So we had 2 or 3 people who designed yachts sometimes in amongst their other work.
Australia does have a really good sailing tradition and racing as well too, though, right?
Yeah, it does, but there's within the design framework, there really has never been a great deal of design done here.
Oh, I see.
For yachts, anyhow. A huge amount of design work for dinghies, and I started to realize that was the more fruitful field to plow. The thing I was most heavily involved with was racing restricted class dinghies.
Okay.
And whereas in the Northern Hemisphere, or particularly in North America, there's a lot of pressure towards one design. And that had never quite been the thing that happened in Australia, because we don't have the size of population to do the tooling for fiberglass boats, or not many of them anyhow.
Right.
So people built their own boats and everything was much more individualistic. And some classes were development classes, which meant that the designs could be refreshed all the time. You only had to stick to basic measurements, and people were trying all sorts of different hull shapes, all different sorts of rigs and so on. And the boats were becoming visibly more refined year by year because of all these smart people, smart amateurs, just redesigning things over the winter season and bringing the boats out. And we could pretty quickly see what was working and what wasn't.
Right. That's nice.
So that was really exciting for me. That was the idea of optimizing things. Plus the class associations with all this development were really good at passing down information. And those were 2 things I wanted to look at, the idea of optimizing over time, not only through picking up new ideas and trying in some way to test whether they're real ideas rather than someone say so, and then to actually record the information in some way so that people could have access to that for their own individual pursuit. Because what happens with our area, our cruising area, is people typically write stuff or talk about stuff and then it's kind of gone. That people are always reinventing the wheel.
I see.
Whereas the value of groups, whether it's on Facebook or podcasts like this, is that it actually builds up a foundation,
Right.
an accepted foundation of information that can be built on. And it's our job to try and make the information as solid as possible, much less hearsay, and things that have actually been tested and proven. Yeah, things that have been tested and proven.
Yeah, those groups are really helpful. Definitely. Used to be on Yahoo, now it's on Facebook. A lot of the groups are, and things like that. They're really good for, like you say, disseminating, passing information around and testing theories, I guess, and having it documented. Okay, so yeah, tell us how you got into your own designs. A little bit your journey, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So I had the yacht design bug, or boat design bug. Like during my teens, every piece of paper that passed over my desk.
Yeah.
Pardon me. Every piece of paper that passed over my desk, I was drawing boats on it. It was just a total obsession. I was reading everything. Because it was pre-internet, I'd scoured all the local and sort of not so local libraries. Made trips into the large libraries in Sydney, and spent time there just digging up books that I'd heard about, and just swallowing up everything whole and trying to apply it. So that was all kind of happening. And then when I was about 20, I guess, I'd been to university to study chemistry.
Okay.
And I dropped out.
So you dropped out?
Yeah. Yeah, so I dropped out and just wasn't really sure what to do with myself. So I started working around the waterfront at yacht clubs, doing all sorts of stuff directly related to boats, and sometimes doing other jobs. And in about 1983, I saved up some money, and I'd basically been working most of my life. So I thought my then partner and I decided to do the big round Australia trip.
Nice.
And we ran out of money halfway through, right in the middle of Australia. And basically, you can't go east or west; you can only go north or south. So we went south down to Adelaide, which is the city with a state capital city, with a population of about 1 million. It's on the edge of the desert, and because it's south, its weather fluctuates between desert conditions virtually, and then the wind swings around to come off the Southern Ocean in winter. So you get strong winds and drizzle. Quite a contrast. There we were both unemployed for a while, just picked up bits of jobs here and there. And one day we went for a drive along the foreshore and found a little boat show at one of the small clubs. And there I ran into the people at DuckFlat Wooden Boats. Yeah. Which have also been important in the growing of the amateur boat building. And I did a course, signed up for a course with them, thinking, okay, this is the start of my boat building. Nice. And I started building a Herreshoff 17-foot rowboat there. And even though I never completed the rowboat, they offered me a job, and I became the technical person at DuckFlat Wooden Boats. Okay. So this was all back in the day of faxing. Okay. Yes. So we get faxes with questions, and we get some locals who were building boats who'd come in with questions, and I'd have to answer them. It's a good proving ground. You probably learned a lot there, right? Well, yeah, I basically changed from a shy nerd, a shy nerdy guy into someone who'd had enough experience answering different questions that I wasn't frightened about it anymore. From there, I picked up a little bit of skill about gas bagging about boats, and gasbagging about very little else. I'm still that shy nerd on every other subject.
It doesn't sound like it.
Yeah. So in that environment, there was plywood, there was timber. I was cutting out kits for people, reading boat plans, and that basically the block for me for designing boats was you can find out I had already my own intuitions about boat shape, and there's a certain amount of material about working out displacements and and sail areas relative to displacement and wetted surface, and all of that stuff's around. But the thing that was really hard to find was anything on structure, on the scantlings of boats.
Okay.
So I'd been really stuck on that. Okay. By this time I was about 27, and I wanted to start designing boats, but this was the key. This was the one thing I was missing. And at DuckFlat, being the main technical guy, we would source plans from all around the world. We knew what the market was all around the world, and we would bring plans from the UK from Ian Uterud, or the US from Jim McCarlick, or wherever. Australian designers too. And if we had to quote for a kit, well, I had to do the quote for the kit, and then I had to saw out the timber. So I was pushing the timber across the bench. I got to know what the best designers in our field of home-built boats were using. That I got to know that Phil Bolger uses really large pieces of timber in the framing, relative to other designers, because he's designing for fastenings. And then Bruce Kirby with his Norfolk Island Sharpies is only thinking about glued construction, or Derek Kelsall with his catamaran. Again, thinking of strip plank, plywood, combinations to build up the hull, and all of it just held together with glue, or glue and a little bit of glass. So I started to see the patterns, and I started to see that if this designer can get away with this, why does that designer have why are those parts in another designer's work so heavy?
Right. So you were exposed to all these designers, and that's a very good position to be in, to see all the plans and the different approaches, right? So nice. Continue.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my apprenticeship in a sense, or in a very direct sense. So I started to really understand that it was much more simple than I had presupposed, and there were some basic menus that you can follow. A huge help at that time was the Goujon brothers book.
Yeah, that was the Bible.
which helped a lot of us to actually get hands-on facts. Like I was saying, facts are a very hard thing to come across. You can find lots of opinions, but what is real? And the wonderful thing about the Goujons is that they did so much testing.
That's right.
Because they had to fulfill government specifications and government contract requirements. So that information was solid. My design information from the cut and thrust of restricted class dinghy designing, that was solid, and I was able to put it all together.
Nice.
And start deciding what would be my first boat to build.
Right. And where was it? Now I'm curious.
Well, I thought about all the different boats I'd designed, I was thinking about all the different boats I'd sailed. And I'd sailed some very, very light boats like the Australian Moth, and some of the moths are as 11 feet long, are the hull weights down around 40 pounds, if not down to 35 pounds.
Wow.
Just absolutely tiny weights.
Wow.
But with enough strength for some of the boats built back in that era to be around for the resurgence in those moths.
They've come back now with the, I guess, the foiling, right? The foiling moths, right?
Well, two things have happened. A lot of people who in the 60s, 70s and 80s, who were building their own moths. At that time, they were all low riders. They were non-foiling.
Mm-hmm.
They've all come back into the game and decided we're all going to sail without foils, and we're going to get all the historic moths sailing again.
Oh, really?
And we'll work out a system where we can have boats from the 60s, 70s, and 80s all sailing together. So that's something that's happening right now.
Wow, I didn't realize. Interesting.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the moths were actually a large part of the search for structures and scantlings because they're built absurdly light, like with a hull weight of 35 pounds, 40 pounds.
Wow.
And plywood of 2 millimeters.
Oh,
what's
my God.
That's two-thirds of an eighth of an inch. So what's that? Down to 1.5 millimeters, which is a 16th of an inch for the skins.
Wow. I didn't even realize you could get. It's almost. I didn't even realize you could get so thin and plywood.
Yeah. Like it. What allows that sort of thing to happen is really smart people trying things again and again, working in groups, designing new boats, several people building boats derived from some of the new designs.
Right.
And everyone does the boats a little bit differently, so people can work out what worked and what didn't work. Whereas one designs are sort of stuck in time.
Right. True.
But what the hell to build? For my first boat. And even though I'd have been exposed to the lightweight moths, a lightweight hull isn't sufficient to get the boat down to the water by yourself. You're always having to ask people to help carry this bulky boat down to the water. And finally it clicked that canoes were the solution.
There you go.
So,
yes.
So I built Beth, my sailing canoe.
Yes.
Which was had a whole bunch of ideas tied into it. But the main ones were that being a canoe, it's compact and I can move the hull around by myself.
Yes.
I was young enough and fit enough to put it on my shoulder once I built it. And to do some interesting things with the rest of the boat. And I'm drawing it up on graph paper, and there's not actually a lot of design work involved with the canoe. So I picked up the Phil Bolger idea of the flat bottom and square sides.
Right.
But I wanted to do a much, much prettier deck. So if you look up the Beth sailing canoe, we've got quite a lot of photos online in various places. It's actually really hard to perceive that the boat is basically a box.
I've seen somebody that built one of your canoes. On the water, it doesn't look like a box, and it's very stable, and it moves really well too. So.
Yeah, it's actually, providing you get the basic proportions right and you don't do anything stupid with the design, a canoe will sail pretty well. Particularly if you get the rig looking good and working well.
Right.
And that was the other part. I had all this plywood available, and the nice boxy hull was going to be fast to build. And as far as the rig went, I wasn't really sure what to do. I was drawing all sorts of Bermudan rigs with fully battened sails. And then a friend from Marine Timbers, which was timber business in Melbourne, about 1,000 miles away, and he sent us a fax of American sailing canoes of the 1870s, with their balance lug rigs and their yawl arrangement.
Right.
And I saw that and I went, hey, that's really cool. I wonder how well those traditional looking rigs can be made to work using modern materials. But I don't mean carbon fiber. I mean, the main thing I was thinking about were things like halyards and downhauls and lashings and so on.
Right.
Because all the lines back in the 1870s, really through to the beginning of World War II, they were all natural fibers.
Right.
So they're forever changing length depending on whether they're wet or dry or how much load is on them.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And one of the great improvements in racing dinghies, or dinghy performance in general, was that the lines that we were using were getting much, much better from World War II and on. So starting to use synthetic lines, and then moving to the low stretch lines like Kevlar initially, with its defect of not really liking to go around corners very much, through to Spectra and Dyneema.
Dyneema now, right?
Yeah, which are both trade names.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do it in a completely modern way, and just see what sort of performance we could wring out of lug rigs. At that time, there wasn't much to read, so
it's a simple rig. So it's a good idea. It's a simple rig, right, for everybody.
Yeah. So it's a 4-sided sail, and it's only got very basic controls. With a modern dinghy, you might have 5 or 6 controls. You have stays to hold up the mast, and the lug rig really does away with that, because the mast is freestanding. The sail has 4 sides. There's a halyard and a downhaul, and the downhaul acts like the Van Kicker, as well as the Cunningham.
Oh, I see.
And then the main sheet. So you've eliminated so many things.
Right.
But the question was whether it could work well or not. So Beth was actually designed to be a cruising boat with the best performance that I could get out of the boat. And that led to her having a cockpit that was okay for sleeping, providing you didn't mind sleeping. It was a cockpit okay for sleeping, providing you didn't mind the resemblance to a coffin.
Yeah, some people don't like it. I'm pretty good with that. I don't mind it at all. So.
Yeah. So I started sailing Beth extensively, started entering some mixed fleet regattas too, and doing really, really well in them.
Yeah, canoes are really fast, so sailing canoes are really fast, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. So I found myself being put in with the lasers, and while Beth isn't fast enough to stay up with a really good person sailing a laser, she was certainly able to keep up with people sailing at a club level.
Nice.
So that was a lot of fun. So very boxy boat, classical deck line looks really beautiful, and then the lug sails, which also look rather beautiful with lots of character.
I love
and
that classic look.
Yeah, absolutely. And gradually finding out that the lug rig has a really gentle jibe.
That's a plus.
That it sails upwind really, really well if there's enough downhaul tension, so that the luff is tensioned and the twist of the sail is controlled. And there really wasn't much difference between the sail being on the windward side of the mast and the sail being on the leeward side, which was really interesting, because on one side the sail is leaning against the mast, so you've got a big crease,
on one tack.
And that was all. Yeah, and that was given as the reason for lug rigs not being efficient. But the interesting thing is later we found out with the Goose that the side with the sail pressing against the mast with the crease is the most, it's the easiest to sail side. The boat just wants to go. So that's what I mean about verifiable information. Like we'd had, 80 years of people saying lugs were no good because of the crease when the sail is against the mast. And then we find out that for the Geese and some other boat, that the sail leaning against the mast is the easiest tack to sail on.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody
That's
can
amazing.
get it wrong.
Amazing information.
And just to, so information that is published again and again was wrong. So how did it get wrong in the first place? And then how did this wrong information continue to be wrong?
Yeah, well, the magazines can't sell as many little parts and the chandlery, I guess. I don't know. It's my cynical side, I guess, but
I think the reason it isn't so cynical. I think what happened was there was a lot of development in the Bermudan rig in the early 1900s through to maybe about 1920, when it started to become the dominant rig. The dominant racing rig for recreational dinghies had been the balanced lug for, maybe 30 or 40 years. And then it gradually phased out. And the reason that the Bermudan rig started to kick off so well was that they had worked out better ways of tuning the sail and mast combination so that the sail would flatten and twist off in a gust quite automatically, and when the gust passes, the mast straightens and the sail powers up again. And also gradually getting better and better methods of controlling the twist of the Bermudan sail. So all of this was happening, and the Bermudan sail is developing by itself, and then someone is asked, well, why are you all sailing Bermudan rigs now and not lugs anymore? And the thought is, well, lugs are slower. Why are lugs slower? And then I think they reach for a reason. And they reach for the obvious reason, which we now know was wrong very often.
Interesting.
But it was just an obvious
You're
choice.
Right. I actually assume, because you're right, everything that it's slower and doesn't point as well and so on. I did assume that, you're right. But I do like the simplicity and the easier setup, obviously. But that's good to hear that it's actually just as efficient. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, I wouldn't say quite as efficient, but reasonably close. And then the time you save in the rigging, it's simpler than rigging a laser. If you haven't gone from getting the boat off the car roof or off the trailer through to ready for sailing in under 5 minutes, then you're not trying. And if you're not trying, maybe it'll take you 7 minutes to get your boat ready. And compare that 7 minutes, by then with a Bermudan rig, you've still got the mast lying on the hull. You're still connecting the side stays. You're making sure everything is going to be okay when you start pushing the mast up with all the rigging. And you've probably got another half an hour of messing around with jib leads and halyard tensions and not getting battens caught in things.
That's correct.
And I like all that stuff. This is stuff I actually like. I like these modern performance rigs. I think they're a lot of fun and they're interesting, but quick to get ready, they are not.
Yeah, to get from like you said, the cart up to the water and get ready to go. You're right. That's definitely, the simplicity is better.
And that's something which I wasn't expecting to be so interested in. So we've got this whole new area of rig development because the lug rig has been ignored, or virtually ignored,
for so long,
for many, many decades. And there's no material around on how to set it up because the internet hasn't really happened yet. We had a few bulletin boards we could log into. Back in those days. And, it was just exciting to find something new and start fiddling around with it and start sailing with a boat for fun, finding out, what the fun aspects of it, blasting downwind, and scaring all the windsurfers, or just sailing past a yacht and they say, "Wow, where did you get that beautiful 100-year-old canoe?" And you just grin and go,
I built
"Yeah."
Well, that was really interesting about the lug sail. That's great. So as you see, we're not done with Michael yet, so we'll have another episode where we go more details about all his designs. In the meantime, thank you for listening. Follow us on the platforms that you use for following podcasts, whether it be YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Feel free to comment, give us a 5-star rating. That's always good, and share with your friends that you like this podcast. This helps us grow. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And last but not least, seize your own adventure.